Greetings. Hello yet again. I am Squancho the Monkey Boy, returning to read from Chapter 3 from Sir Ballsfart's debut masterpiece novel, Sir Ballsfart in the Forest of Penises. Once again, I would like to begin with a trigger warning, as Sir Ballsfart has most likely chosen words that you will find deeply offensive. And so, we begin with Chapter 3, The Legend of the Buttstone. I really needed to get the fuck out of that nasty temple, but that creepy old turtle was strangely adamant about telling me his buttstone story. So, just to get it over with, I joined him and all the other roped kappas in the final chamber of the bridge. I only agreed to even do this because they promised to prepare me a big bowl of stew made from eggplant, cucumber, and that shitty bird that I'd killed. As a younger kappa came in to present me with the soup, the older turtles started stinking up the place with their heaviest incense. Once that was done, they all joined in on some weird chanting before the eldest among them stepped forward. And this is essentially the convoluted, dumb fuck story that he proceeded to tell me. 3,000 years ago, our ancestors suffered immensely. This was an age of grave darkness for our people. They were starving, and their children were being crushed into paste in their schools. Countless horrendous atrocities occurred in those days, and worst of all, they occurred with little or no explanation. Now, to defend themselves from such unspeakable tragedies, our ancestors kept at that time a powerful weapon. And they would have certainly used that weapon had they only known what enemy it was that deserved their wrath. But no enemy did they find, and the crushing of their young ones only became more prevalent with each passing season. Luckily, it was around this very time that the one known as Baron Rapefist came to our people's aid, bearing special cures for their sadness, as well as a truly fantastic opportunity. The Baron told our ancestors that there was a land to the north where they could forever be safe. He promised that if they were willing to clear out as many of the trees in that land as they possibly could, that they would be allowed to build their temples over the local streams and live freely, protected from the terrors that were plaguing them, and sustained by any penis-shaped vegetables that they could grow within their designated areas. Obliged by their unbearable circumstances, our ancestors accepted the Baron's kind offer and emigrated northward upon a long and painful march into that strange new land. In those days, this place was simply known as the Forest of One Giant Growing Penis, though, as I'm sure that you can tell, much has changed since those days. Upon arriving, our ancestors soon made their temples, building them even larger and more robust than ever before, using as much of the forest timber as they possibly could, and even agreeing to clear away yet more of the forest than they themselves needed, as per their agreement with the Baron. Treaties were soon made with Nyadis, which is the subterranean city of the local freshwater merfolk, and in these agreements it was decided that there would be no violence or aggression between our bridges and their waterways. As you might expect, we were initially apprehensive of making such agreements, as the history of the merfolk had led us to assume that they might be traitorous. But we soon found their skills in negotiation to be quite reasonable, as they had already made their own treaties with the strange little creatures that reside within the mountains to the east. That mountain range, which forms the outer rim of this land, is known as the Chodies, and upon its highest peaks was built that fantastic citadel wherein dwells Baron Rapefist, overlooking all of the forest. As the centuries passed and the trees disappeared, the Baron nurtured that one singular giant growing penis, spawning a multitude of similar formations that ranged in size and appearance, and also in odour, and it was these new variations which grew wild throughout the land where the trees had been removed. Soon travellers quit referring to this region as the forest of one giant growing penis, or even as the forest of 2 or 3 giant growing penises, but now refer to it simply by its current name, the Forest of Penises. Some visitors, of course, were not happy about these changes, as was perhaps to be expected, and many feared this highly invasive species of giant growing penis could develop into some sort of blight. Though we Kappa feared no such outcome, this notion seemed to be corroborated by the fact that most of the indigenous wildlife was forced to retreat from the forest, leaving only large strange insects and the birds that devour them, though rumours still tell of other bizarre things that might lurk about as well. It was believed that the foreigners feared greatly that these penises might continue growing well beyond the bounds of the forest, eventually filling all the world with peckers and schlongs of a somewhat unreasonable scale. But luckily, for all those concerned, the old merfolk magic that had long lingered in this land held true, barring the penises from growing outside the confines of the local region and binding them to their homeland. And so came a time of great peace, and also enormous disembodied penises, and our ancestors were long content with such a lot, all things considered. Though they occasionally met travellers lost within their lands, such occurrences became exceedingly rare with each of the passing centuries. This exuberant peacetime seemed as though it might never end. But finally, on one horrible and infamous winter day, unimaginable suffering returned to the memory of our people. It was the drake. It had come from the east, and it came huge fiery loads of cum that decimated any unlucky enough to witness its chizzings. From its powerful and gargantuan scaly cock, that awful flying monstrosity rained terror down upon our people. Many of our finest temples were soon utterly annihilated by its horrible and creamy loads. Responding to this crisis of gravest significance, our elders convened to discuss a solution, and their deliberation was quick, as the answer was obvious. Only one power could protect us from such a calamitous invader. It was that ancient and powerful weapon that I have spoken of already. The buttstone. The buttstone, it is said, is primeval beyond all mortal reckoning. It is a gem of absolutely inconceivable strength. And it is an enigma. Even our wisest elders know not from whence it first came, nor from whence it draws its immeasurable power. Legends claim that it feeds upon souls, and that it is filled with innumerable tortured spirits of some forgotten plane existing far beyond space and time. But regardless of its mysterious origins, it first enters into our definitive history during the War of Dry Pussy, 10,000 years ago. It is said that in those days, a brave dwarven warrior named Gideon Tate Scratch single-handedly wrestled the buttstone from the grasp of some horrid ancient enemy, and in doing so shifted the tide of war, granting his allies victory and sending his enemies scurrying into the dark, forgotten realms beneath the surface of the world. Throughout that conflict, our Kappa ancestors had remained neutral, and it was for this reason that Taint Scratch gifted our elders with that most hallowed and supernatural buttstone when all of the battles were finally won. And so, for 7 millennia, our people lived in peace, and the buttstone remained safe within our keeping, locked deep inside a sacred hidden vessel. At many times during those ages did our ancestors consider implementing the buttstone to combat their various foes, but never did their enemies seem deserving of such cosmic rage. And in those dark times of which I have already spoken, when our people were starving and their children being crushed alive, we would have finally made use of the buttstone had we only known who was responsible for our suffering. But with the appearance of that ferocious and tyrannical Drake, the time had finally come to make use of our ancient defense. As soon as the decision was finalized, the elders located the sanctified vessel that housed the great buttstone, and they opened it. But upon doing so, were immediately horrified to find that our sacred relic had indeed been stolen. Even now, none can say for sure when it was that the buttstone was taken, and in those early years paranoia and despair swept like wildfire across our people. The buttstone, our most precious artifact, had been ripped from our grasp. This was truly an act of blasphemy of the cruelest order, for the buttstone had been our birthright, our salvation. And now, with no hope of protecting ourselves from this horrible creature and its ghastly genitalia, emissaries were sent to commune with the only one who might help us, the one who holds dominion over these strange lands, the Baron, Right-Fist. But after months of patiently awaiting a response, we accepted that none of our emissaries would ever return. And so a second group was assembled and sent once again to question the Baron. And then a third, but just as the first, no emissaries ever returned. Finally, a summit was bidden with the Merfolk Queen, and at this rare conference, news of the most disturbing character came at last to light. We learned that the merfolk had both discovered and confirmed certain dark rumors about the Baron, which together cast a grave shadow upon our understanding of his character. We learned that he was responsible for certain strange and unsettling secret activities, and to make matters worse, we found as well that the very same Drake that had been haunting our people resided, in fact, within the Baron's very own citadel. This was dreadful information to receive, for we had been blissfully ignorant of the Baron's true nature for centuries, and now had no options of anywhere else to flee, for our communications with travellers from afar had warned us that the outside world would be most unwelcome to our immigration into their lands. And so it seemed that we were trapped. Agreements were soon arranged with the merfolk. We would offer them certain goods and services in return for an increased mystical protection over the forest. This, if anything, is responsible for the recent decline in attacks by the nefarious schlong of that fiendish Drake. And so, since then, the centuries have passed slowly, and we Kappa have waited, and we have trained, and we have rubbed our nude bellies together in preparation for the day when a suitable champion might arrive among us. Perhaps you are that champion, and perhaps you are not. But we must beg of you, should our theories prove correct, and the Baron now hold our most precious item in his possession, you must please return to us that great and powerful buttstone. Again, it is the very birthright of our people. Should you do this for us, I swear that we Kappa will forever be within your debt. And we will always tell you how badass you are, because then you will certainly be the most badass in all of ever. Or I think he said something like that, more or less. Honestly, I started dozing off about 4 lines in. That bird meat makes you crazy sleepy, and I'd already had a busy day. When I awoke the next morning, I was still lying on the floor of the Kappa temple, the sun's bright rays slapping me in the eyes as they crept between slats of heavy wooden windows. I yawned, a wide and manly yawn, and then noticed that my arm was asleep. Damn it. I hate when that happens, but as is my style, I always try to make the best of a bad situation. Gracefully, I slid my limp hand into my trousers and began rubbing it vigorously upon both my cock and balls. As I did so, I thought hard about Princess Tits, but for some reason, that wasn't really working this time. It still just felt like some grown man's dead, dismembered hand slapping around my penis. But then, as I thought about that, it started to work. I guess there are just certain things that cannot be explained. I furrowed my brow and bit my tongue, just as it was getting good, but unfortunately, the whole thing was soon ruined by that stinging, tingling sensation that you get when your hand starts to wake back up. You know what I'm talking about. Also, it was just kind of hard to ignore all those Kappas staring at me. Unsatisfied, I pulled my hand out from my trousers, gave it a quick sniff to make sure everything was still healthy, gathered my things, and then headed out the door. As I stepped out into the morning air, fresh with the pungent odor of giant dicks, that eldermost Kappa came running out behind me, begging to fill me in on just one more thing. Traveler, before you go, there is one last thing that I must tell you. He paused and caught his breath as I turned around. Though the Baron appears to be an elf, he is not an elf. He is taller than their kind. His skin is bright blue, and his dark eyes sparkle with molten gold. You should know that whatever he is, it is far more powerful than any mere elf. And should you find some magical weaponry to combat him, he will still almost certainly kill you. Thanks, but go fuck yourself. Be careful, traveler. Many dangers await. Long before you encounter the Baron, you will meet the perilous natural wonders that reside within this forest, many of which are creatures that you do not yet understand. These are strange beings, which have each made a life among these penises and found their own unique ways of surviving. There has arisen an order amongst them that you must learn to live in accordance with if you ever wish to cleanse your soul and survive. Do you understand? Just then, an overhead bird splashed a big warm diarrhea dump right into the elder Kappa's brain bowl. I shook my head, turned around, and started walking. All right, well, that was chapter 3. I guess it was going pretty well for a minute there, and then we got back to the usual thing. You know what though? It wasn't quite as bad as the last one. So I guess you know, It could be worse. But anywho, this has been Squancho the Monkey Boy, once again reading Sir Ballsfart in the Forest of Penises by my lord and closest friend, Sir Ballsfart. Wishing you a wonderful day. Thank you very much, and bye.